The moment I knew I didn't exist to them, not really, was when I overheard Brandon call me the duct tape lady outside the restroom. She keeps the pipes from bursting, I guess he laughed to someone on speaker, but legacy plumbing isn't scalable. Then the toilet flushed and I stepped out, made eye contact, and walked past him like I was deaf and dead inside. Inside, though, I felt something snap. Not in a dramatic movie trailer violin sting kind of way, just a clean little pop, like a paperclip finally bending one too many times. I'd been with Valence Systems for almost a decade. Operations director, the human failsafe nobody noticed, until something broke, or someone panicked, or the deadline clock hit single digits, and suddenly everyone remembered who held the system keys. I didn't build sexy features or pitch at conferences. I rebuilt our disaster recovery from scratch after the Chicago outage. I rewrote our licensing handoffs when our first compliance review failed. And 3 years ago, I quietly, legally, inserted myself into the most forgotten document in our entire infrastructure, the source code escrow protocol. Not because I wanted revenge, because I didn't trust any of them to remember what it protected. Oh, and hey, if you've gotten this far and you're not subscribed, hit that button. Like the story. 90% of you never do. And honestly, every time someone clicks subscribe, it's like a little middle finger raised at Brandon from across the internet. That's how our team keeps these stories alive. Thanks. Anyway, Brandon, the founder's son-in-law, MBA from somewhere overpriced. Hair like a Lego man's helmet. He showed up in polished Oxfords and a fake humble attitude, freshly minted as VP of Strategic Acceleration. Translation: he had no idea how the company worked, wanted to be on every slide and in every decision. His strategy involved nuking anything he couldn't understand in 10 seconds and slapping buzzwords on the ashes. Within a week of arrival, he was reviewing cost centers. I knew what that meant. It meant spreadsheets without context, red lines through roles like mine, and late-night whispers to the board about streamlining. He started calling me Cost Center Sandra. Not to my face, of course. Brandon was a coward, but I saw the Slack messages he accidentally pasted into the wrong thread. I saw the BCCs from finance that someone forwarded anonymously, his notes about legacy personnel drain and how compliance handoffs should be no-brainers. I was apparently a no-brainer to eliminate. The irony? If he'd asked, I would have walked him through every contingency plan he was about to destroy. But he never asked. Brandon didn't believe in expertise older than a Bluetooth headset, so I did what I always did, kept the wheels turning. Renewed the license dependencies, rotated the recovery tokens, verified the escrow checkpoint, my name still securely listed in the third-party contract as authorized release validator. If the company was sold, breached, or bankrupted, that code vault was the emergency airbag. Untouched unless disaster hit, or unless someone like Brandon accidentally triggered the clause. And let me tell you something, he didn't even know it existed. I don't mean that metaphorically. The day he scrolled through our infrastructure schema during the quarterly sync, he literally glossed over the escrow entry like it was a typo, called it legacy weirdness, and told the junior dev taking notes to flag it for removal consideration. I remember blinking. Removing the escrow clause would have been like removing seatbelts from a moving car because you didn't like the color. But again, I said nothing. I wasn't ready yet. The founder, Ron, still ran the board, still showed up once a month in cargo pants and Crocs, pretending not to watch as Brandon swung a golf club in the break room. Ron was old school, knew who I was, trusted me. But lately he'd gone quiet. Let Brandon run meetings, let him bulldoze processes. I think he wanted to believe the company could outgrow its scaffolding. What he didn't realize was, I was the scaffolding. You know how it feels to be the only adult in a room full of children playing CEO? It feels like slowly drowning in email chains about synergistic roadmap consolidation. It feels like being handed a mug that says Team MOM as a joke, even though you're the only reason the codebase hasn't combusted. It feels like being muted, figuratively, for months, until one day they try to do it literally. The town hall was supposed to be routine, some quarterly hype session with canned applause and pre-approved bullet points. But Brandon had other plans. He took the virtual stage like he was launching a rocket, all jazz hands and jargon, practically vibrating with whatever podcast had convinced him he was a visionary that week. Valence Systems is entering its velocity era, he announced, like a man who thought slogans were strategy. Behind him, the slides changed every 10 seconds. Buzzword whiplash, modular synergy, client delight streams, T-minus acceleration. Then came the bomb, a full roadmap rewrite. Delivery windows cut in half. Backend integrations skipped. Compliance reviews deferred to later phases. It was like watching someone duct tape a Tesla battery to a shopping cart and call it agile innovation. No one said a word, because no one wanted to die on a Zoom call. So I asked calmly, what's the fallback if the deployment fails? You'd think I asked him to strip naked and recite the Federalist Papers. His smile twitched, he blinked. I'm sorry, Sandra, are you suggesting we plan for failure? I didn't blink. I'm suggesting we plan for reality. The client-side APIs aren't validated for this load. If we bypass the escrow checkpoint and something breaks, rollback won't be. He muted me, he actually muted me. In front of 87 attendees, including junior devs, legal, and the founder himself, who, as usual, was dialed in but off camera, probably watering his succulents. A few people gasped. One engineer's camera shut off like he'd ducked under his desk. Brandon kept talking like nothing happened. Let's stay focused on solutions, not fear. And just like that, the call moved on. No one unmuted me. No one said a damn thing, but the Slack messages started right after. First came the direct ping from Brandon. 9:12 a.m. Brandon. Let's not undermine momentum with hypotheticals, Sandra. 9:13 a.m. Brandon. Your negativity's been noted. We're streamlining roles soon. Might be a good time to think about fit. 9:14 a.m. Brandon. And BTW, chain of command matters. You're not in engineering leadership anymore. Didn't even punctuate, just stacked the threats like playing cards. I stared at the screen, then typed exactly 3 words. 9:15 a.m. Sandra. Copy that. Noted. I didn't need to fight him in Slack. That's what Brandon wanted. A paper trail of me acting out. A record of insubordination he could parade to HR. Instead, I went quiet. That same afternoon, HR requested a quick sync. The calendar invite had the gall to be cheerful. Let's chat. I joined the Zoom call 10 minutes early. It was Brandon's favorite HR rep, Chelsea, 28, deeply committed to yoga and conscious capitalism. Her eyebrows were already furrowed when she joined. Hey Sandra, thanks for hopping on. We just wanted to get your POV on today's town hall. There's been some feedback. About what tone mostly? She smiled like she was offering me a gluten-free cookie. Your question about failure scenarios. Some folks felt it disrupted the vibe. Brandon's trying really hard to build morale right now. I let silence stretch. Counted 4 Mississippis. Did those folks happen to include Brandon? I asked. Her smile strained. Well, he's one of several stakeholders who flagged it. Flagged what? A question? Just energy. She tilted her head like a therapist in a sitcom. Your energy. Let me tell you something about office gaslighting. It never starts with fire. It starts with flickering fluorescence, hallway whispers, soft HR voices using words like tone and alignment, and maybe it's time for a fresh perspective. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I thanked her for her time and left the call. Then I reopened the escrow clause. Clause 17C, termination of named validator without procedural review. It sat there in black and white. If I was removed without formal review, the source code repository locked for 72 hours, requiring external audit clearance, triggered automatically. Brandon had just sent the first volley. He didn't even realize it landed on a minefield. The first clear rift had opened and he stepped in barefoot. I kept my camera off for the rest of the week, didn't speak in meetings, let them feel the absence, and I watched, carefully, because I knew something was being built. Not just his little launch plan. No, a trap with his name on it. The thing about corporate executions is that they rarely come with a bang. More often, they arrive draped in the passive-aggressive silk of organizational evolution. The call that morning was billed as a strategic realignment town hall, which, in Brandon speak, meant he was about to fire someone in public and call it vision. I logged in 3 minutes early. 82 attendees already on. The participant list looked like a roll call of anxiety. Junior devs, middle managers, contractors, HR reps pretending to be productive by overusing reaction emojis. Brandon's camera came on with that trademark backlighting that made him look like he was ascending into thought leadership heaven. He cleared his throat. Thanks, everyone, for joining on short notice. I want to start by honoring the incredible momentum we've been building. This company is evolving, and that means sometimes we need to optimize certain roles for scale. I felt the blood leave my face. There it was, optimized like I was a line item, a bloated macro. Then he said it, didn't even flinch. As part of this evolution, we'll be phasing out a few legacy operations functions, including Sandra's role, muted just like that. I was still on camera, live to 80+ people, and he muted me. No warning, no direct conversation, no exit meeting, just phased out. Her contributions have been appreciated, Brandon said, smiling like a Botox ad, and we wish her all the best as we move forward into this next chapter. A pause, silence, clicking. Probably Slack messages exploding behind the scenes. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I stared directly into the lens. Then slowly, deliberately, I reached off-screen and held up my badge. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple plastic rectangle with my face on it. A few people in the corner squares tilted their heads like confused puppies. 1 second, 2. Then I rotated it just slightly until the small holographic seal near the bottom edge caught the light. It shimmered, a faint triangle over a locked vault icon. Barely visible, but anyone in legal would have recognized it. It was the visual marker issued by Lex Shore, the third-party firm managing our source code Escrow. That seal wasn't just branding, it meant I was a named validator. And if I was removed without a compliance review, well, the vault sealed shut, automatically. No override, not without a formal audit and authorization from an external party. I didn't say a word, I didn't have to. You could feel it ripple through the room. Not among the execs, they were too clueless, but among the engineers. One backend dev's eyes went wide. Senior compliance analyst reached for his phone. One camera went dark, then another. Brandon kept talking. We'll have one-on-one scheduled for impacted teams later this week. but I want everyone to stay focused. This is a celebration of what's next, not what's ending. I muted him, not literally. But in my mind, click, gone. I turned my camera off, logged out. No message, no goodbye, no HR-acquired exit Slack status with balloons or a coffee cup emoji. Just a badge, a shimmer, and a clause they forgot existed. 15 minutes later, I was sitting on my porch with a cup of chamomile tea and a cat I didn't own. My phone lit up with Slack pings. Emails, missed calls. One from Ron, the founder himself. Ignored, I knew what came next. The panic, the scramble, the whisper-fueled realization that Brandon hadn't just fired someone. He'd triggered a bomb, and the detonation timer already ticking. The calls didn't go out until 12 minutes after I left the Zoom. That's when the ripples started forming into waves. Legal pinged HR pinged legal. The CTO's assistant asked Slack if someone could loop me in on what exactly just happened. Then someone realized the founder, Ron, good ol' Ron in his eternal beige hoodie, had been on the call the entire time. Not talking, not even visible, but present. That was the moment Brandon's swagger started to rot from the inside. According to someone who later screenshotted the chat, because nothing stays private in a company that runs on gossip and shared Google Docs, the first message from legal was just one line. 10:47 a.m. J. Smith, legal. Did you terminate the escrow validator without review? Brandon didn't reply. Not in Slack. He walked into legal's office like a man who thought his last name was enough armor. I wasn't there to see it, of course. But I was BCC'd on a frantic email chain by someone in facilities who always liked how I restocked the emergency snack drawer with real chocolate, not that chalky protein bar crap. Office loyalty runs on pettiness and sugar. From what I pieced together, Brandon walked in smiling. By the time he walked out, the CTO had canceled a product roadmap session, and two legal interns were deep in a third-party contract binder dated 4 years back with my signature on it. Clause 17C, the one he'd never read, the one I'd built like a silent noose, triggered only when someone got cocky enough to cut me loose without ceremony. Around 11:10, someone finally unmuted Ron. He coughed once. You could hear the quiet hum of what was either an air purifier or the slow exhale of a man about to crush someone under a legally binding document. Brandon, he said, calm as a sunrise funeral, the lead investor is on my other line. Pause, and you fired the person on the escrow line item? The silence after that wasn't just awkward, it was biblical. Brandon tried to stammer something. He was streamlining outdated roles, didn't have full context. Was told Sandra's duties were duplicative, all of it nonsense. All of it sound waves with no substance. Ron didn't yell, he didn't have to, he just said legal. Get me the binder, full copy. And then he left the call, just like that. What happened next was chaos in 5 Slack threads. Hash and for ops lit up with backend engineers asking if they should pause code pushes just in case. Hash client support was flooded with customer success reps reporting minor outages. Nothing catastrophic yet, but little anomalies that hinted something was already unraveling. Hash HR questions saw 5 anonymous messages in 10 minutes, all variations of, so, is Sandra gone? And are we compliant? Brandon stayed quiet in all of them, because here's the thing, he didn't even know what escrow clause meant. He'd sat in meetings where we'd reviewed high-risk contingencies, nodded along like a bobblehead with a LinkedIn account, and immediately forgotten everything that didn't involve synergy or scalability. He didn't realize that when a company promises clients their source code is protected in case of catastrophe, someone has to hold the keys to that vault. That someone was me, until he decided I wasn't worth the bandwidth. And now the vault was locked. The third-party system. Lexure had already sent an automated alert at the moment my termination synced with their endpoint. A 72-hour blackout protocol was engaged. Code couldn't be accessed. Failover systems were disabled. Until a compliance review cleared the override, the company's core product infrastructure was legally untouchable. They were flying the plane, but I had pulled the safety net out from beneath them. Quietly, legally, elegantly, and the best part, I still hadn't said a word. I hadn't replied to their emails. I hadn't answered my phone. I hadn't even tweeted. I sat in my kitchen, slicing an apple with surgical calm, while somewhere across town Brandon was realizing he'd just kicked open a vault door and found it full of bees. The trials had begun, and I was the storm they called redundant. Clause 17C wasn't written in a panic. It wasn't reactive. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't even personal. At least not then. It was written the way you write an obituary for a system, with finality, precision, and the quiet assumption that someone someday would get arrogant enough to need it. When we integrated with Lexure back in 21, nobody wanted to deal with the escrow terms. It was considered insurance theater, one of those things you sign because procurement told you to, and then forget about until the building's already on fire. I didn't forget. I sat through every clause, negotiated every release condition, and insisted, politely of course, that we insert a line saying the validator, once designated, could only be removed with a formal compliance review. No verbal decisions, no reorgs, no silent removals by entitled VP spawn with half a plan and no idea what happens when code loses its parent process. I was the parent process. At 12:14 p.m., the system hiccuped. Low-priority integration with a long-standing enterprise client failed. The alert went to support first, someone flagged it as transient. Then another ping hit, this time from the CI/CD pipeline. Jenkins stalled out mid-build. The dev who spotted it thought it was just Friday gremlins. Then everything stopped. Code couldn't be pushed. New containers wouldn't spin. The access token rotation loop locked itself in a failsafe, and the screen lit up with a single line. Lecture notice, escrow release condition triggered. Awaiting external review. Clause 17C, triggered. At 12:47 p.m., the CTO finally admitted they didn't have the override key. Not just didn't have it, couldn't have it. The process was designed to function like a dead man's switch. If the validator, that'd be me, was terminated without a procedural review filed to Lecture and approved by internal compliance and legal, the system assumed it was hostile and locked everything down. No access, no code, no client updates. Just silence. Across town, Brandon was reportedly pacing in a glass-walled conference room, whiteboard marker in hand, trying to sketch out a way around the clause. One engineer said he asked if they could just comment out the integration point. Comment out the integration point, like this was a group project and not a $1 million liability tied to contractual obligations with 5 Fortune 500 clients. Legal, by then, had pulled every version of the agreement. They scanned every amendment. They called Lecture directly. No dice. Protocol was engaged. It wasn't just automated, it was audited. Every move from that point forward was time-stamped, reportable, and subject to third-party review. Meanwhile, I was at home, hair up, socks mismatched, watching reruns of Frasier and eating a sandwich so ugly it would have been banned from Instagram. My phone buzzed nonstop. I ignored it. Emails stacked like junk mail. Unread. A courier knocked with a large manila envelope. I didn't answer the door. I didn't need to. They weren't looking for me anymore. They were looking for the function I represented. The missing piece in a system they never bothered to understand. Clause 17C wasn't about revenge. It was about limits. It was a boundary drawn in legal ink years before Brandon ever stepped into the building, and now it was the only thing standing between his arrogance and total product collapse. Clients started noticing. Not the smaller ones yet, but enterprise accounts. Ones with SLAs fat enough to hire their own lawyers began logging inquiries. We're seeing disruption. Can someone confirm service continuity? Are we within the terms of the MSA? You could almost smell the fear through the fiber optics, but I didn't gloat. I didn't text anyone some smug gif or post cryptic tweets like fire or some of y'all about to be real embarrassed. I just sat, still, quiet, watching the dominoes fall, not because I pushed them, but because they insisted gravity didn't apply to them. It did, and Clause 17C was written in stone. By 2:03 p.m., the CTO finally stopped pretending it was just a hiccup. He was the last one holding the Brandon line, kept repeating that these systems are resilient, that we've got manual overrides somewhere, that the team just needs space to work. Could almost hear the brittle crack when he finally said the sentence that started unraveling Brandon's house of cards. We need Sandra's signature. He didn't say it with any emotion, just resigned, like a man waking up mid-fall and realizing the parachute's packed inside the woman he just helped toss out of the plane. From what I was told later, the room went dead quiet after that. Brandon had been pacing, still high off his own supply, probably mid-sentence about crisis agility when the CTO cut him off. Said it again, slower. The platform doesn't move without her token. Not today, not tomorrow, not until that audit clears or she signs off. Brandon's nostrils flared like a spooked racehorse. He spun it fast. Okay, so we'll loop her back in. No big deal. She'll understand this was a miscommunication. I'll message her. And he did. I watched the little notification pop up on my phone like a roach crawling out of a wall socket. 2:07 p.m. Brandon, Slack. Hey Sandra, sorry for the mix-up earlier. Can we chat for a sec? Just need a quick sign-off to get things moving again. 2:10 p.m. Brandon, Slack. Totally understand if you're upset, but the team's kinda stuck here. Let's reset. Water under the bridge. 2:15 p.m. Brandon, Slack. Sandra, I didn't open a single one. Left them lined up like dominoes he couldn't push. Let him sit with the silence. By 2:30, the lead investor's legal team was already looped in. They weren't warm, they weren't patient, they were surgical. A woman named Lindsay from the investor's compliance office joined the next Zoom and didn't waste a second. Her first question, was this a planned termination? Brandon tried to bluster through it. We were reviewing redundancies. Legacy roles, ops inefficiencies. It was an optimization effort across. She cut him off. Where's the board approval? Board wasn't required for this tier, Brandon said, too fast. We had discretionary, no, she snapped. You had discretionary authority for non-designated roles. You terminated someone with third-party validation authority tied to escrow failovers. That's not discretionary. That's a contract breach. The CTO visibly winced. Legal started typing like courtroom stenographers on meth. Brandon tried again. We can fix this. I'll reach out. She'll come around. Lindsay leaned forward. She's under no obligation to, not after what you triggered. Ron finally unmuted. His voice sounded colder than I'd ever heard it. She was on the clause for a reason, Brandon, he said. I trusted her with the most volatile kill switch we have, and you yanked it without checking the fuse. Brandon went pale. I could imagine it perfectly, him sitting there, tie askew, eyes darting, suddenly aware that none of the people in the room were allies anymore. The CTO had gone quiet. Legal was already drafting timeline memos. HR had completely vanished, probably reverse scrubbing let's chat, emojis from the digital record. All while I sat in my backyard, barefoot in the grass, slicing up strawberries for pie I had no intention of sharing. My phone rang once, office number. Then again, unknown. Then again, Ron. I let them all go to voicemail, because this wasn't desperation yet, this was early crisis. The part where they still believed I'd answer out of duty or guilt or nostalgia. But those things only exist when people treat you like a person. Brandon had treated me like a spreadsheet line. Now the company spreadsheet had hash value, errors across every column that mattered. The shift was quiet but undeniable. Power had left his hands and started flowing somewhere else. Toward me, not because I asked for it, but because I built the one door they couldn't pry open. And now I was the only one with the key. By 3:22 p.m., the last illusion that Brandon had any idea what he was doing finally died, and it died on screen in front of legal, the board liaison, two investor reps, and the CTO who now refused to make eye contact with anyone. The phrase that did it? She didn't just sign the clause, she designed it. That was Lindsay again, compliance attorney. Investor rep, destroyer of men who use synergy like punctuation. She held up a scanned PDF during the emergency call, zoomed in on the page that started it all, the original source code escrow agreement with Lexshore. The clause wasn't boilerplate. It wasn't pulled from a template or shoved in by legal because they were bored. It was mine, hand-typed, footnoted, reviewed and redrafted with external counsel until it passed a real-world breach simulation. I didn't just appear on the clause. I constructed the walls and poured the concrete, then put my name inside like a time bomb. The audit trail told the rest of the story. Every clause had metadata. Every signer was tracked. The trigger for emergency escrow lockdown wasn't just my role being terminated. It was my identity key, a hash-based verification token, registered through Lexshore and hardwired into the infrastructure as part of the final commit. Brandon, blinking into the void, asked the only question that confirmed how far out of his depth he really was. Can't we just replace her token? Lindsay turned, blinked once like a cat watching a fly die in slow motion. No, it's cryptographically bound. Any override would require multi-party reauthorization, third-party audit, legal sign-off, and a security review that hasn't been done since she left because you never initiated one. Legal chimed in. Her exit triggered an automated lock. That lock requires external validation before it can be bypassed. And the person who originally architected the process, Sandra, wasn't offboarded properly. There's no backdoor, and until that's cleared, the CTO asked, his voice like sandpaper. Lindsay deadpanned, you are operationally paralyzed. That's when the founder, Ron, finally snapped. He didn't yell. Ron didn't yell. But his voice went from dad who owns the company to Marine who built this from nothing in half a breath. You mean to tell me, he said slowly, venom in every syllable, that this kid, he didn't even look at Brandon, fired the one person who built our legal fallback system and disabled the trigger without board notice or compliant sign-off? Brandon tried to speak. Ron cut him off. Don't say anything. The chat lit up. Someone accidentally sent a popcorn emoji. It stayed there for 6 solid seconds before they deleted it. Meanwhile, I was in my garage sanding the edge of a bookshelf I'd been meaning to finish for months. Dust in the air, light streaming through the half-open door. Calm, precise, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was happening exactly as I designed it. I didn't just draft the clause, I embedded my signature in the release protocol, the system that governed how and when the company's most critical code assets could be accessed after a catastrophic failure had me at its center. Not symbolically. Literally, I'd written the verification script myself. The check required a two-factor confirmation, one of which could only be executed by my personal token, stored on a physical device now sitting quietly in a locked drawer in my desk. When I walked out, the token deactivated. When Brandon fired me without protocol, the rest snapped shut. And now the entire company was caught in the teeth of a lock they never thought they'd need, designed by the woman they deemed legacy overhead. Their roadmap dead, their product pipeline frozen, their investor confidence evaporating faster than Brandon's career. And still I hadn't spoken. They asked if I'd join a call. I didn't. They offered a reconciliation chat. I declined. I was done being part of a chorus that never let me solo. They could sit in that boardroom, surrounded by their own fumes, staring at contracts they never read and infrastructure they never understood. I had already said everything I needed to 3 years ago in a clause no one respected until it became the only voice that mattered. It came as an email first. Short, cold, efficient. Subject line, proposal for oversight engagement from Lindsay Vaughn, lead counsel. Enwell Capital Partners, the body contained exactly one sentence. We would like to schedule a conversation regarding independent compliance oversight moving forward. Your terms? No flowers, no flattery, just leverage recognizing leverage. I read it 3 times before closing my laptop and going back to watering the succulents Brandon used to laugh at. One of them was already growing a new arm. The next morning, the call wasn't a Zoom. It was a closed bridge line with voice-only access. No small talk. Lindsay was joined by Renwell's VP of Strategic Holdings and another name I didn't recognize but whose voice sounded like she regularly made grown men cry during depositions. They didn't beg, they didn't sell, they offered. Not a return, Lindsay said, not as staff, not as direct report. We're proposing a retained compliance authority position. Independent, permanent, you'd report to us. I let the silence hang just long enough. And Brandon? I asked, purely as a formality. On leave as of this morning, she replied like she was reading a grocery list, pending internal review of his decision-making, asset risk exposure, and unapproved structural changes. We'll be restructuring HR as well. Too many gaps. Autonomous, I said. Full authority over compliance audit and escrow protocol. No internal interference. No dotted lines. Yes. Budget control? Yes. Unrestricted access to historical and live infrastructure. Agreed. I took a breath. Then my answer is yes. They sent over the paperwork within the hour. It wasn't boilerplate. It was sharp, aggressive, and carved entirely in my favor. I had a direct reporting line to the investor board. No internal executive could override my findings. My contract included a clause requiring any attempts to remove me be subject to full investor vote and third-party arbitration. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a firewall. By noon, the internal memo went out. Subject, oversight and compliance transition effective immediately. Sandra Kim has been engaged by Renwell Capital Partners as independent compliance officer overseeing escrow protocols, continuity systems, and audit alignment. She will not report to Valence Systems leadership. Her authority is derived directly from investor governance. I didn't draft it, but I approved every word. Brandon's name didn't appear. Neither did HR's. Their absence said more than inclusion ever could. That afternoon, someone from my old team messaged me privately. 1:13 p.m. Dev Nate, not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but holy SHT. Legend move. I didn't reply. I just left it on read. With the same quiet gravity they used to ignore in meetings, until ignoring me broke the company's spine. When I returned to the building for the first time since being phased out, the security guard didn't even blink. My new badge had already been couriered in advance. Different color, different logo. No department name, just my title, oversight. External, I walked past Brandon's old office. Empty. Just a half-drunk protein shake and a whiteboard still scribbled with Q3 domination. Sure. Inside the conference room, Ron stood at the head of the table. He didn't look mad anymore, just tired, older, and maybe finally a little bit respectful. You really buried that clause deep, huh? He said. No, I replied. I planted it. He smiled, not warmly, but not sarcastically either. I should have known better than to let a jackass with a golf swing fire my architect. I didn't answer, just took my seat, the one that faced the entire table. They called it a return, but I wasn't returning. I'd leveled up. Now I was the ghost in their system, with a badge that couldn't be revoked, a contract written in iron, and a seat that didn't need their permission. The only question left was, who else thought I was replaceable? Because I was done forgiving the ones who forgot I built the damn walls they hid behind. Emergency board meetings started like a funeral where no one could admit who died. No catered lunch, no performative handshakes, just 12 people seated in leather chairs around a glass table, staring at the door as if it might open and fix everything. But the only thing that walked through was consequence. Brandon was already seated when I entered, head down, tie loosened, eyes flicking around like he still expected anyone, to come to his defense. Usual bravado had been siphoned out of him in the last 72 hours. He looked smaller, softer, like a balloon 2 days post-party. The founder Ron stood at the far end, arms crossed, expression like concrete. No coffee mug, no Crocs, just a silence that could split bone. Let's begin, Lindsay from Renwell said flatly. Brandon stood, voice shaky. If I could, I'd like to clarify the misunderstanding that led to enough. Ron didn't yell. He didn't need to. The force behind that word could have flipped a table. He turned to me. First time we'd made eye contact since this whole thing started. Sandra, he said evenly, please walk them through Clause 17C. I took a breath and spoke. The first time since being optimized. My voice was calm, clinical, stripped of emotion like a scalpel made of protocol. Clause 17C was designed to prevent unauthorized termination of compliance-critical personnel, whose access governs third-party escrow systems. The clause is hard-coded to trigger an automated 72-hour blackout of source code availability if the designated validator, me, is removed without formal compliance and legal review. The protocol was created during our Lex Sure engagement in 2021 and reviewed quarterly until Brandon discontinued those reviews. No one interrupted. I continued. The release process requires 2 tokens, one generated by Lex Sure's system and the second issued by me through a multi-factor identity protocol. Without both, rollback access is denied. That safeguard exists because continuity isn't optional. It's architectural. And firing the architect without checking the beams collapses the house. Lindsay nodded once. Has the review been completed? Yes, I replied. And under my authority as compliance officer, I've issued the final authorization for platform restoration. A beat. Then I turned to Brandon. He opened his mouth like he had something, an apology, a plea dressed as an apology, but I didn't give him the room. My first executive decision, I said, gaze steady, is finalizing your optimization. Pause. To 0, you could feel the temperature shift. Half the board exhaled. The CTO leaned back like someone had just unplugged a power drill from the base of his neck. Lindsay's mouth twitched, maybe a smile, maybe just satisfaction adjusting its seat. Brandon didn't speak again. He just stared, slack-jawed, realizing he had no levers left to pull, no buzzwords to duck behind. Just a terminal slide into irrelevance. Ron gave a single nod. Not to Brandon, to me. Escrow restored, he said, so is she? Then quieter, meeting adjourned, chairs scraped, papers shuffled. But no one really moved, because everyone in that room knew something permanent had shifted. A power no one understood had just stepped into the light, and it didn't ask permission to return. It walked back in holding the master key. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.